between 1945 and 1950, 5 people walked into the Vermont wilderness and simply disappeared. No bodies, no evidence, no explanation. Now most people who've heard about the Bennington Triangle think they know what happened here. They'll tell you it's just another case of unfortunate hikers getting lost in the woods, bad weather, poor navigation, tragic accidents, nothing more than a series of coincidences in a particularly unforgiving stretch of wilderness. But here's what they don't tell you. These weren't inexperienced tourists. These weren't reckless adventurers, and the way they vanished, it defies every logical explanation we have. Because when an experienced hunting guide disappears in terrain he knew like the back of his hand, when a woman vanishes in broad daylight on a well-traveled trail with witnesses just minutes behind her, when a man literally evaporates from a moving bus full of passengers, you're not looking at coincidence anymore. You're looking at something that breaks the rules. In this video, I'm going to walk you through every single disappearance in chronological order, show you the evidence that investigators tried to bury, reveal the patterns that connect these cases, and present you with theories that range from the scientifically plausible to the absolutely terrifying. And here's my proof that this isn't just folklore. The FBI got involved. Multiple statewide searches with hundreds of volunteers found nothing. And to this day, Vermont officials won't explain why they unincorporated the entire town of Glastenbury in 1937, 8 years before the disappearances even started. So let me ask you something before we dive in. What time is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments, because trust me, by the end of this video you're going to be looking at the darkness outside your window a little differently. Let's go back to where it all began. To understand the Bennington Triangle, you first need to understand Glastenbury, Vermont. And here's the thing. Glastenbury doesn't technically exist anymore. Picture this. In the 1800s, Glastenbury was a thriving logging town. Hundreds of workers, busy sawmills, a charcoal industry that supplied half of New England. The forests were alive with the sound of industry. The mountains echoed with human activity. This was prime American frontier, people conquering nature, building civilization. But then something changed. By the 1880s, workers started reporting strange things in the woods, unexplained sounds, the feeling of being watched, equipment going missing. Some refused to work certain areas of the forest entirely. The local Native American tribes, the Abenaki people, had always avoided this region, calling it cursed ground, where the spirits didn't rest properly. The white settlers had ignored these warnings for decades. Then came the floods. In 1898, a massive flood destroyed most of the town's infrastructure. Businesses collapsed. People started leaving. By 1900, what had been a booming industrial town had become a shadow of itself. The buildings remained, but they were increasingly empty. Here's where it gets interesting. By the 1930s, Glastenbury's population had dropped to less than a dozen people, and in 1937, pay attention to this date, the Vermont legislature did something unprecedented. They officially unincorporated the town. They wiped it off the map. The official reason: tax purposes. Not enough residents to justify maintaining it as an official township. But here's what doesn't add up. Vermont had other small towns with similar populations. None of them got unincorporated. None of them got erased from official records. Only Glastenbury. Only this specific area. Question for you. Do you think governments ever hide the real reasons behind their decisions? Comment cover-up if you think there's more to this story, or coincidence if you think I'm reading too much into it. Now Glastenbury and its neighboring ghost town Somerset sit at the center of what author Joseph Citro would later call the Bennington Triangle, a roughly 100 square mile area of southwestern Vermont bounded by Bennington, Glastenbury, and Woodford. The landscape itself is unforgiving. Dense forests with visibility of maybe 20 feet in any direction. Mountains that create natural confusion with similar-looking terrain everywhere. Weather that can shift from clear skies to dangerous storms in under an hour. And trails that seem to loop back on themselves, making even experienced hikers feel disoriented. But plenty of places in America have challenging terrain. Plenty of places have dark forests and abandoned towns. What makes the Bennington Triangle different is what started happening in the 1940s. Because in 1943, the disappearances began, and what happened over the next 7 years would turn this forgotten corner of Vermont into one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. But before I tell you about the first victim, I need you to understand something. These weren't random people. Each person who vanished had a reason to be in those woods. Each one had skills, experience, or local knowledge, and each one disappeared in a way that makes absolutely no sense. Let me show you what I mean. Mitty Rivers was 74 years old, but don't let that fool you. His man was a hunting guide who knew every inch of the long trail. He'd been hunting these mountains for over 50 years. Local legend said Rivers could track a deer through a snowstorm and find his way home blindfolded. On November 12, 1945, Rivers was leading a group of 4 hunters through the wilderness near the Long Trail. They were experienced hunters, all local men who knew the area. Mid-afternoon, the group stopped for a break. Rivers walked ahead to scout the area, something he'd done thousands of times. He was maybe 50 yards ahead. Maybe. When the group continued forward a few minutes later, Rivers was gone. No response to their calls. No tracks beyond a certain point. No sign of a struggle. An experienced woodsman had vanished into rain. He knew intimately, in good weather, within shouting distance of 4 other men. The search party that formed found nothing, and I mean nothing. No clothing, no equipment, no indication of where he'd gone. But here's the detail that still haunts investigators. 2 years later, in 1947, a local family hiking in the area stumbled across skeletal remains. They were confirmed to be Mitty Rivers. Where were the remains found? Less than 3 miles from where he'd disappeared, in an area that had been searched multiple times by hundreds of volunteers who knew what they were looking for. So how did professional search parties miss a body in an area they'd combed through repeatedly? Hold that question, because Rivers was just the beginning. Victim 2, Paula Jean Welden, December 1946. Paula Jean Welden was an 18-year-old sophomore at Bennington College. Bright, popular, experienced hiker. On December 1st, 1946, she told her roommate she was going for a walk on the Long Trail, the same trail where Rivers had vanished a year earlier. Now, here's what we know for certain. Paula was seen by multiple witnesses walking north on the Long Trail. She was wearing a bright red jacket, impossible to miss. An elderly couple passed her on the trail, and even spoke with her briefly. She seemed perfectly normal, perfectly fine. The elderly couple continued down the trail. Behind them came another hiker. Less than 5 minutes later, Paula Jean Welden was gone. The second hiker saw no one. No red jacket, no footprints leaving the trail, no side paths she could have taken. In less than 5 minutes, on a well-traveled trail in broad daylight, Paula had vanished completely. The search for Paula became one of the largest in Vermont history. Police, FBI, hundreds of volunteers, even the Connecticut State Police sent resources. They searched for weeks. They used tracking dogs, aerial searches, interviewed everyone who'd been in the area. Nothing. Not a single piece of clothing. Not one footprint off the trail. No evidence she'd ever been there, except the witnesses who'd seen her minutes before. Her father spent years searching. He never gave up. He died without answers. But wait, it gets stranger. Because the disappearances weren't done. Not even close. Victim 3, James E. Tetford, December 1949. James Tetford was a 74-year-old veteran who'd been visiting family in St. Albans, Vermont, on December 1st, 1949. Exactly 3 years to the day after Paula Welden vanished, Tetford boarded a bus heading back to his home at the Soldiers' Home in Bennington. 14 passengers were on that bus. Multiple people saw Tetford in his seat, awake and reading. They saw him there when the bus made a stop in Montpelier. The bus continued toward Bennington. No additional stops. No one got off. When the bus arrived in Bennington, James Tetford was gone. His luggage was still in the rack above his seat. His belongings were on the seat. An open bus schedule was lying where he'd been sitting. But Tetford himself had disappeared from a moving vehicle, without anyone noticing. Let me repeat that. A man vanished from a bus full of witnesses, and no one saw him leave. The bus driver was interrogated extensively. Every passenger was interviewed. The route was searched. Police examined every possible scenario. James Tetford had literally disappeared into thin air. And here's my question for you. What do you think is more likely? That a 74-year-old man somehow snuck off a moving bus without anyone noticing? Or that something else happened on that route? Drop your theory in the comments. Victim 4. Paul Jepson. October 1950. 8-year-old Paul Jepson was playing near his mother's pig farm in the Bennington area on October 12, 1950. His mother, who was working nearby, checked on him regularly. She saw him playing in his usual spot. She turned away for maybe 15 minutes, just 15 minutes, and when she looked back, Paul was gone. An immediate search began. Dogs picked up Paul's scent and tracked it to a nearby highway. Then, the trail went cold. Completely cold. The dogs, trained trackers, couldn't find any continuing scent in any direction. Here's the strange part. Bloodhounds tracked Paul's scent to the exact area where Paula Jean Welden had disappeared 4 years earlier. The exact spot. Hundreds of volunteers searched for weeks. They found no trace of the boy. No clothing. No footprints. No evidence he'd ever been there. But multiple residents reported something odd. The day Paul disappeared, several people claimed to have seen a strange man in the area. Someone who didn't belong. Someone who was watching the property. Police investigated these reports extensively, but could never identify this person. Paul Jepson was never found. Victim 5. Frida Langer. October 1950. Just 2 weeks after Paul Jepson vanished, Frida Langer disappeared. And this one breaks every rule in the book. Frida was 53 years old, an experienced hiker, and she was camping with her cousin in the Glastenbury area. On October 28, 1950, they were on a well-established trail near a stream. Mid-hike, Frida slipped and fell into the stream, getting soaked. She told her cousin, "I'm going back to camp to change. It's only a quarter mile. I'll be back in 15 minutes." Her cousin watched her head down the trail toward camp. Frida never made it. When she didn't return, her cousin went back to camp. Frida wasn't there. They organized a search immediately. We're talking within an hour of her disappearance. Massive search. Hundreds of people. Professional trackers. Aerial searches. Nothing. For 7 months, Frida Langer was missing without a trace. Then, in May 1951, her body was finally discovered. Want to know where they found her? In a completely open area that had been searched multiple times, an area that searchers had literally walked through repeatedly during the initial search. And here's what makes no sense. The body was too decomposed for officials to determine a cause of death, but Frida had only been missing for 7 months. In Vermont winter, which would have actually preserved the body better. Something about the decomposition didn't match the timeline. So what was it? Where had her body been for 7 months? How did hundreds of searchers miss it in an open area? The official report provided no answers, And after Frida Lange's body was discovered in 1951, the disappearances stopped. Just stopped. 5 people in 5 years, all in the same small area, all vanishing under impossible circumstances. And to this day, only one body was ever recovered. Alright, so what happened? Let's break down the theories, from most rational to absolutely terrifying.
Theory 1. Natural causes.
This is the official explanation. The one law enforcement defaulted to: simple accidents. Tragic, but explainable. They say Mitty Rivers had a heart attack, or got disoriented. Paula Welden got lost, and died from exposure. Paul Jepson wandered off, and met with misadventure. The others, same story, different details. But here's why this doesn't work. First, Mitty Rivers was an expert guide in perfect health. He disappeared within earshot of 4 men in good weather. Second, Paula Welden vanished on a clear trail in 5 minutes, witnessed by multiple people, wearing bright red. Even if she'd walked into the forest, searchers would have found some trace. Third, James Tetford disappeared from a bus. A bus. You can't accidentally wander off a moving bus. And Frida Lange, her body appeared in a searched area months later, in impossible condition. The natural causes theory falls apart under the slightest scrutiny. Theory 2. Serial killer. This is where things get dark. Some investigators believe a serial killer was operating in the Bennington Triangle between 1945 and 1950. The evidence? The disappearances follow a pattern. Similar geographic area. Similar victim profiles, mostly vulnerable, elderly, young, or alone. And the complete absence of evidence suggests someone who knew how to hide bodies. There were reports of a strange man in the area before Paul Jepson's disappearance. A figure who didn't belong, who was watching. But here's the problem. No bodies were found except Frida's, which appeared mysteriously. A serial killer needs to dispose of bodies. 5 bodies in dense forest should leave some trace. Disturbed earth, scavenger activity, something. And it doesn't explain James Tetford vanishing from a moving bus full of witnesses. Unless the killer was on the bus. Unless he was one of the passengers. Unless this was far more calculated than we think. Creepy thought, right? What if the person responsible was hiding in plain sight? Drop it in the comments if you think this theory has merit. Theory 3. Government experiments. Now we're getting into conspiracy territory, but stay with me, because this one has some interesting support. Remember how Glastenbury was unincorporated in 1937, 8 years before the disappearances began? What if that wasn't about taxes? What if the government wanted to clear the area for something else? The 1940s and 50s were the height of Cold War paranoia. The US government was conducting all kinds of classified experiments, radiation tests, psychological warfare research, you name it. Remote, unpopulated areas were perfect for this kind of work. Some theorists believe the Bennington Triangle was a testing ground, maybe for experimental weapons, maybe for mind control technology, maybe for something we still don't know about. The evidence? The FBI's involvement in the Paula Welden case was unusually extensive for a missing hiker. The complete absence of bodies suggests sophisticated disposal methods, and the sudden stop in 1951. Maybe the project ended. But here's the weakness. If this was government work, why make people disappear so publicly? Why risk exposure? And why use such a small, specific area? It's possible, but it requires believing the government was willing to murder citizens for experiments, which unfortunately isn't as far-fetched as we'd like to think. Theory 4. Dimensional portals and energy vortexes. Okay, now we're leaving science behind and entering the realm of the paranormal. Some researchers believe the Bennington Triangle sits on a dimensional weak point, a place where the barrier between our world and others is thin. They point to reports of strange lights in the sky, unusual electromagnetic readings, and the feeling of disorientation that even experienced hikers report in the area. The Native American tribes called this place cursed. They avoided it for generations. What did they know that we don't? The theory goes like this. At certain times, under certain conditions, portals open in the Bennington Triangle. People step into these portals unknowingly and are transported elsewhere. Another dimension, another time, another reality entirely. It would explain the complete absence of evidence. It would explain how people vanish in seconds. It would explain why bodies don't turn up. Here's my question. What's the weather like where you are right now? Comment your current weather, because allegedly, these phenomena are more common during specific atmospheric conditions. Shiori 5. The Wendigo. Finally, we come to the oldest explanation. The one the Abenaki people whispered about for centuries. The Wendigo is a creature from Native American folklore, a malevolent spirit that inhabits forests and feeds on human flesh. But here's what makes it relevant. The Wendigo is said to have the power to control minds, to lure people away from safety, to make them vanish without a trace. Multiple witnesses reported feeling an overwhelming compulsion to leave the trail in the Bennington Triangle, a pull toward the deep forest, an urge they couldn't explain. Paula Welden's disappearance fits this pattern perfectly. She was walking calmly, normally, and then simply gone, as if something called her into the woods. Is it possible there's something in those mountains, something old, something hungry? Or am I just trying to scare you? Drop Wendigo in the comments if you think there's something supernatural in those woods, or logic if you think there's a rational explanation we haven't found yet. The truth is, we don't know. We may never know. But the story isn't over, because strange things are still happening in the Bennington Triangle. The official Bennington Triangle disappearances ended in 1950, but that doesn't mean the strange activity stopped. Throughout the 1960s, 70s, and even into the 2000s, hikers have reported bizarre experiences in the Glastenbury wilderness, compasses spinning wildly, pointing in random directions, electronics failing completely, cameras, phones, GPS devices, all dying at once. The sensation of being followed by something just out of sight, voices calling from the forest when no one else is around, time distortion, hikes that should take an hour, taking 3, or vice versa, finding themselves back at the same spot repeatedly, despite walking in a straight line. In 2008, a hiker reported getting separated from his group near the long trail. He said he heard his friend calling his name from deeper in the forest. He followed the voice for several minutes before realizing the voice was leading him away from the trail. When he turned back, his group was frantically searching for him. They said he'd been gone for over an hour, but to him it had felt like 10 minutes. In 2015, a woman hiking alone reported seeing a figure standing motionless between the trees, watching her. She said it looked human, but moved wrong, jerky, unnatural. When she blinked, it was gone. Have any of you experienced something strange in the wilderness? A feeling you couldn't explain? Comment your location and what happened. I want to map these experiences, but here's what's really interesting. When researchers started plotting all the disappearances and strange incidents on a map, a pattern emerged. They're not random. They cluster around specific areas within the triangle, areas that correspond to geological formations, underground caves, magnetic anomalies, unusual mineral deposits. Some researchers believe these geological features might create electromagnetic disturbances that affect human navigation and even consciousness. Could this explain the disorientation, the feeling of being called into the forest? Or is there something about the physical structure of this land that makes it different? And here's something that should concern you. The Bennington Triangle isn't unique. There are similar zones all over the world. The Bermuda Triangle, obviously, but also the Michigan Triangle over Lake Michigan, the Nevada Triangle near Area 51, the Alaska Triangle, where thousands of people have disappeared, the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts. All of these areas share common features: high numbers of unexplained disappearances, reports of paranormal activity, unusual geological formations, Native American legends warning people away, electromagnetic anomalies. It's as if there are spots on Earth where the normal rules don't apply, where reality gets thin. And here's my question. What if there are more of these zones we haven't identified yet? What if you live near one right now? The Bennington Triangle remains largely abandoned to this day. Glastenbury has no permanent residents. The forests have reclaimed the old logging roads. Nature has erased almost all evidence that humans ever lived there. But the trails remain. The long trail still cuts through the heart of the triangle. Hikers still walk it every year. And every few years, someone reports something strange. A missing time experience. A voice in the forest. A figure in the trees. The question isn't whether strange things happen in the Bennington Triangle. The evidence is overwhelming that they do. The question is, why? So, what's the truth? What really happened to those 5 people between 1945 and 1950? After researching this case for months, reading every report, examining every theory, I've come to a conclusion. We're asking the wrong question. Everyone wants to know what happened. Was it a killer? Was it nature? Was it something paranormal? But maybe the real question is, why did it stop? Think about it. 5 disappearances in 5 years, all following a pattern, all in the same small area. Then suddenly, nothing. Complete silence after 1951. If it was a serial killer, did he die? Move on. Why stop at 5? If it was natural causes, why such a cluster in such a short time? Then nothing. If it was paranormal, did the portal close? Did the Wendigo leave? Did something change about that land? The government unincorporated Glastenbury in 1937. The disappearances began in 1945. They ended in 1950. What was happening in those years that made the Bennington Triangle so active? And here's what haunts me. Frida Langer's body appearing in a searched area 7 months later. Where was it before? Why did it suddenly appear? And why was it in that condition? It's as if something or someone returned it. As if whatever took these people was done with her. I'll leave you with this. Paula Jean Welden's father spent the rest of his life searching for his daughter. He walked those trails thousands of times. He interviewed witnesses, followed every lead, never gave up hope. Before he died, he said something that stuck with me. Something in those woods knows what happened, and it's not telling. So let me ask you one final question. If you could spend one night in the Bennington Triangle, in the exact spot where Paula Welden disappeared, would you do it? Comment yes or no, and be honest with yourself about why you answered the way you did. The Bennington Triangle remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. 5 people walked into those woods and never came back. Their families never got closure. Their stories never got endings. But maybe that's the point. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Maybe some places are meant to remain unknowable, untouchable, dangerous. The trails are still there. The forests still stand. The mountains still rise above southwestern Vermont, silent and watching. And somewhere in those woods, the answers wait, if you dare to look for them. Before you go, drop your location in the comments. Let's see where everyone's watching from. Are you watching this during the day or late at night? And would you ever visit the Bennington Triangle yourself? If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of America's darkest mysteries, hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations into the unexplained. Next time, we're investigating the Alaska Triangle, where over 16,000 people have vanished in the last 50 years. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and maybe stay out of the woods.